Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half an hour, we're going to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. So let's have a look at what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Observer leads with warnings to British holidaymakers that long delays at the border between the UK and France could become the new normal. The Sunday Telegraph carries an article by Rishi Sunak in which he says if he becomes Prime Minister, he intends to place an annual cap on the number of refugees allowed into the country. And another piece by a politician appears in the Sunday Express, where Boris Johnson insists the government has got all the big calls right during his tenure and did get Brexit done. The Sunday Mirror reports that some NHS staff are being forced to sell their annual leave days to stay financially afloat. And the Sunday People hears from sources who say that the British Army isn't big enough to participate in the war in Ukraine. The Sunday Times has seen data suggesting that only around a fifth of GPs now spend most of their time seeing patients, with others taking on research posts and leadership roles within the NHS. And with word that Britain is the hottest it's been since the Stone Age, the Star exclaims, "Yabba dabba phew." Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers. That's while you sit and watch us talk about them. Well, we are joined tonight, as I was telling you, by Rachel Shabi and Wallis Simons. Really good to see you both this evening. What a week it's been. I hope you haven't suffered too much in the heat wave. Certainly a lot of people who've been trying to make their way to get on holiday, particularly heading down to the port in Dover, are getting pretty fed up with it, aren't they? Front page of the Observer, Rachel. Travellers being told to expect that it's going to be the new normal.
Yeah, they're absolutely right to feel fed up and frustrated. I mean, I can imagine, a lot of people trying to get away with the school holidays and potentially, it's the first time away for a few years. People have been saving up and looking forward to holidays that are just being totally thwarted or frustrated by these awful queues that we're now being told could be the new normal. This is a consequence of Brexit, it has to be said. These delays are caused because there now needs to be a passport check going into France. It's worth pointing out, as this piece does, that this was all anticipated. In fact, executives at Dover Port said to the government, I think it was 2020, they said, look, we need here is a £33 million proposal to double capacity at Dover Port so that we can actually take on this extra workload that Brexit will create. The government completely ignored that. And lo and behold, here we are in this situation for which it seems there is no end in sight.
Jake, what do you think? I mean, we're told that Grant Shapps is on the case, that he's talking to his counterpart in France, but it just seems the tensions with the French government are just ever present, aren't they?
That's right. I mean, to say that Brexit had nothing to do with this, of course, would be wrong. Brexit is in the picture, but it's not the whole story either. I mean, don't forget, Brexit, we voted to leave the European Union 6 years ago. That's a long time to get these things sorted. And with the right will and investment, it should have been achievable, quite easily achievable, actually. But unfortunately, we find ourselves in this situation with massive tailbacks, an emergency incident declared. And part of that has got to be the fact that the French aren't upholding their part of the deal in trying to make this new arrangement work. We know there have been only 4 out of 10 passport booths manned at Dover by the French officials. And that doesn't help. And so I guess it's just a sense that the Brexit vote has cast a long shadow, and people are still feeling bad about it, still harbouring resentment and bitterness about it, in a way that's just ruining many, many people's holidays and causing frustration, widespread frustration across the UK.
Oh, Rachel, I could see you shaking your head there. The relations between the UK and France do need to improve, don't they? Otherwise, this sort of thing's going to keep happening.
Oh, of course they do. I'm shaking my head because that directly contradicts what's actually in this piece. It's worth looking. Lord Ricketts, as a former ambassador to France, is quoted in this piece. He says, it's the delays are inevitable outcome of the bureaucracy created by Brexit. He says the shortage of passport officials is short-term. The long-term serious issue, I'm quoting here, is that this is the first time we've seen the full pressure on the border of Brexit. This is the first time we've seen the normal summer pressure on that border because of the pandemic. And it is worth pointing out that the French are only doing what they are legally required to do according to EU laws, which Britain helped to write. That is all that France is doing. We have only ourselves to blame for this situation.
Well, let's hope that things certainly get better down there for people who've been waiting a very long time in their cars, some of them with young children, that gets better as the week goes on, the weekend goes on. Let's move on to the front of the Sunday Telegraph, Jake. It feels like there's a long way to run still, doesn't it, till we have the new Prime Minister in place, and we're going to keep getting new pledges coming from them. This is now Rishi Sunak coming up with a 10-point plan to cap the number of refugees.
Yes, I mean, this in a way is a reminder that the next Prime Minister will be determined by a vote of Tory members, not the population as a whole. And so both candidates are trying to make an appeal to the Tory membership, whose centre of gravity is further to the right than the average person, I suppose. And in particular, Rishi Sunak here is trying to regain his appeal to the Tory right, which Liz Truss has outflanked him in recently. And he's trying to do that by being tough on illegal immigration. And if you read the piece that he wrote, there's nothing that he says there that's particularly either surprising or controversial. He's talking about clamping down on illegal immigration, not immigration, net migration, or anything of that sort.
Jake, your line is breaking up a little bit.
Of solutions.
Jake, I'm sorry to cut you off, but your line is breaking up a little bit, and I think Rachel's keen to come in. So what did you want to say in response to that while we try and sort out Jake's line?
I mean, first of all, just to agree with Jake that clearly they are pitching to the party membership, which has dramatically shifted to a quite hard right position on many things, including tax, including immigration. This quite clearly the headline, I would cap the number of refugees, says Sunak. This is about refugees. This is him saying he wants to, quote, inject a healthy dose of common sense into the asylum system. He cannot do that. First of all, it's not common sense. It's obtuse, uncommon, incompassionate sense. Secondly, Britain is signed up to international laws on refugees. We have a commitment. If people are seeking asylum in the UK, we are duty-bound to honour that. And you can't just say, oh, we're not going to do that suddenly one day, unless you're saying that you're going to tear up that treaty as well.
Yeah, let's come back to you, Jake. We sort of cut you off mid-flow there with what you were saying. I mean, sometimes the line, certainly from the perspective of Tory members, people who vote for the Tory party, that line between refugees, illegal immigration does tend to get blurred, doesn't it, in people's minds?
That's right. And if you read Rishi Sunak's piece, which is inside the Telegraph, of which this news story is a write-off, as we call it, you'll see that he is talking about illegal asylum seekers, not refugees. He's talking about illegal migrants who come on dinghies, who come across in that way. And the ways in which he's talking about dealing with it range from putting pressure on employers not to hire people without documentation, illegal asylum seekers, all the way through to allegedly putting them up on cruise ships, which is quite a strange and eye-catching idea. But either way, I think that most people in the country understand that while we are a very open country, we're open-hearted, we embrace immigration, and we certainly embrace genuine refugees to get them a home here. It's the illegal asylum seekers who come over to Britain, particularly across the Channel in dinghies, that really is a problem that is growing month by month, that needs to be addressed for their sake as well as for ours.
Final word from you on that particular article, Rachel.
There is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. That's not a thing. Jake's word salad there just indicates part of the problem. It's so jumbled up and incoherent, the conflation of refugee with migrant. There are illegal routes to the UK, and the reason that people are pursuing those routes is because there aren't any legal routes. If you want to prevent people getting into unsafe dinghies, then provide them with safe and legal routes to seek asylum in the UK, which they are entitled by law to do.
All right, I think I want to take us on to a slightly lighter note here, and I feel like we can't ignore the photograph with the photo heading on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, the photograph of Boris Johnson there in his camouflage, lobbing a grenade, in which they've entitled it "Parting Gesture." What do you make of that, Rachel?
I mean, it's kind of like Boris Johnson's bucket list of things that he wants to do while as Prime Minister. And sure, whatever, it all looks like bumbling Boris Johnson doing his jolly japes thing. But he is doing this in the middle of, the country free-falling in several areas. The cost of living scandal, the problems at the border with people trying to go on holiday, so many things that he should be looking at. And instead, he's just off partying and enjoying himself. It is a bit jarring, isn't it?
Yeah, so it depends on what political persuasion you are. But yes, plenty more for us to talk about and for you two to bicker about after the break. Coming up, there are reports tonight that some NHS staff are being forced to sell their annual leave days to make ends meet. We're going to be discussing that coming up for you after the break. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me again, Rachel Shabi and Jake Wallis Simons. Good to have you both back. Two pretty big, important stories concerning the NHS, pretty dire warnings as well concerning the NHS. Jake, to you first, the Sunday Times headline is "No longer feasible to be a full-time GP." What does that mean?
Well, I think the reverse is probably true. It's no longer feasible to find a full-time GP. I think most people in Britain are finding it very hard to get appointments with GPs, particularly face-to-face. And this story makes the point that most GPs are forming portfolio careers. So they are working part-time as a GP, but then also doing some private work, doing some work in hospitals and so forth. And the time they spend as a GP also has quite a lot of paperwork that takes up a lot of their time. Some of it, of course, is valuable and important and unavoidable, but there's part of it that perhaps could be slimmed down a bit. But there are some startling figures in there, including that GPs have gone from working something like 47 hours a week to something like 26. So GPs are working much fewer hours as GPs. And this, of course, is giving the public a far reduced service and causing people to go to A&E instead of going to their GP surgery out of despair about getting any kind of appointment at all. So it really is a difficult state of affairs that I think everybody is feeling up and down the country at the moment when they try to get appointments with their GP.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you've got 6.6 million people waiting for NHS treatment. Yeah, OK. Rachel, let's talk about...
That's right. I mean, the waiting...
Sorry, go ahead. OK. I think we're going to move on. I'm going to cut my losses with your line there, with your line there, Jake, and come to Rachel. Let's talk about the front page of the Mirror, where you've got staff having to sell their days off just to make ends meet, to pay their bills.
Sure. So this is the Mirror reporting this as an exclusive that growing numbers of NHS staff are basically selling off their annual leave, as you say, in a desperate bid to just make ends meet. They're giving up time and then in return get extra pay. Now, we're looking at NHS, this is across the NHS at all levels, and we're looking at a workforce that is burnt out, stressed out, overwhelmed. Big chunk of them have PTSD, actually, after dealing with the horrifying stresses and burdens of the pandemic. And, you know, we're now hearing that some NHS hospitals are frantically setting up food banks for NHS staff to access as well. So it's a really dismal state of affairs. When you think about it, you know, these are the workers that we're supposed to cherish. And yet we don't treat them like that. The government is not treating them like that. We should not be having a situation where these staff, who we value so much, are forced into using food banks. It's also worth remembering that in real terms, public sector pay has not gone up in 10 years, which in real terms means it's fallen because it hasn't kept up with the cost of living. The very least we can do is to make sure NHS staff are paid at the least in line with inflation.